Today I'm going to show you a 1992 crime thriller film titled Reservoir Dogs. Be ready for spoilers ahead. The film opens with 8 men eating breakfast at a diner, 6 of them wearing matching black suits and only using aliases to hide their identities. Mr. Blonde, Mr. Blue, Mr. Brown, Mr. Orange, Mr. Pink, and Mr. White, an elderly Los Angeles gangster boss Joe Cabot, and his beefy son, nice guy Eddie. When it comes time for Joe to pay the bill for the meal, he tells everyone to throw in $1 for the tip. However, Mr. Pink explains that he does not tip, and he defends his anti-tipping policy until Joe angrily convinces him to contribute to the group. After the opening credits, the action cuts to the inside of the robber's speeding car. Mr. White, driving with one hand, is trying to comfort Mr. Orange laying in the back seat, who has been shot in the abdomen and is bleeding and screaming in pain. They arrive at an abandoned warehouse, the robber's rendezvous point. Orange begs White to take him to the hospital, but White refuses, saying that it's very risky. He assures him that he shouldn't get worried since it takes a long time to die from an abdominal gunshot wound. Mr. White leaves Mr. Orange on the floor as Mr. Pink emerges, angrily suggesting that Joe Cabot's orchestrated jeweler robbery was a police setup, as evidenced by the police's swift response to the alarm. White agrees, and they wearily get their story straight with each other. The first of several flashbacks shows Mr. Pink escaping from the jewelry store with the diamonds. 3 policemen chase him as he runs down a street, but a car hits him. Pink drags the woman driver out of the car and fires at the policemen, hitting 2 of them before getting back in the car and driving away. In the present, Mr. White informs Mr. Pink that the police shot and killed Mr. Brown during the getaway, leaving both Mr. Blonde and Mr. Blue uncertain of their whereabouts. The 2 agree to stay put for the time being. A brief flashback shows Mr. White meeting Joe, a low-level veteran criminal from Wisconsin, and offering him a job in an upcoming heist in a few months. Mr. White agrees, hinting at his longtime friendship with Joe Cabot. In the present, while tending to an unconscious Orange, the 2 men engage in a discussion about Mr. Blonde's sudden psychotic behavior during the heist, which resulted in the murder of several civilians in the store after setting off the alarm. Mr. White is angered about Joe's decision to employ such a violent individual and agrees about the possibility of a setup, while Mr. Pink confesses to having hidden the diamonds in a secure location. However, they engage in a violent argument over whether to transport the unconscious Mr. Orange to a hospital. This argument intensifies when Mr. White reveals that he has revealed his true first name to Mr. Orange. Mr. Blonde, who has been watching them near the entrance, steps forward and ends the dispute. White angrily chews out Blonde for his antics, while Blonde calmly defends himself, saying simply that he'd warned the staff of the jewelers not to touch the alarm. He instructs them not to leave the rendezvous, citing his conversation with nice guy Eddie, who is en route to meet them. After everyone calms down, Mr. Blonde takes them to his car and opens the trunk to reveal a captured police officer named Marvin Nash, whom he apparently took as a hostage to escape from the jewelry store. Another flashback shows Mr. Blonde meeting with Joe Cabot and nice guy Eddie at their office. It reveals that Mr. Blonde became involved in the heist because of his friendship with nice guy Eddie. Blonde had served 4 years in prison for armed robbery and had refused to give the authorities Joe's name for a lighter sentence. First, Joe and Eddie arrange a job that will appease Blonde's parole officer. Eddie then suggests that Blonde join the crew they're putting together the jewel heist, a proposal he enthusiastically accepts. In the present, White, Pink, and Blonde beat the policeman, demanding that he reveal who the rat is, to which he protests that he doesn't know. The beating continues until a furious Eddie arrives at the warehouse. After berating the men over the carnage and incompetence displayed at the heist, he tells them that beating Nash won't get them closer to finding out anything. He orders Pink and White to assist him in retrieving the stolen diamonds and disposal of the 2 hijacked vehicles outside, which he thinks will attract attention. He orders Blonde to stay with Nash and the dying Orange. When Blonde casually questions Officer Nash again, the policeman states that he has been a police officer for 8 months and is ignorant as to a possible setup. He then pleads with Blonde to release him without further incident. However, Blonde confesses that he is a sadist and psychopath who enjoys torture, and he is genuinely indifferent to what the cop knows or doesn't know. He turns on the radio and dances before slashing Nash's face and severing his right ear with a straight razor. Blonde then retrieves a can of gasoline from the trunk of his stolen car and douses Nash with it, making a small trail of the remaining gasoline in front of the policeman. Just as he is about to light the gasoline, he is hit by several shots. Orange had unexpectedly woken up and shot Blonde several times to stop him from burning Nash. With Mr. Blonde dead, Mr. Orange and Officer Nash are now alone in the warehouse. Orange reveals he is a police detective named Freddy. Marvin says that he is aware of Orange's identity because he had a brief encounter with him several months prior, demonstrating that he had resisted the beating and torture to conceal Orange's true identity. Orange reassures Marvin that a massive police force is in position several blocks away but is waiting to move in when Joe arrives. Another lengthy flashback details Orange's involvement in a deep-cover police operation to capture Joe Cabot. One night at a local diner, Mr. Orange meets his handler and informs him that he has joined the gang after meeting Joe and nice guy Eddie at a nightclub earlier that evening. He describes how a criminal informant down in Long Beach planted his false criminal past as a reference to be accepted. Orange also talks about Mr. White, whom he did not recognize as part of Joe's group. In subsequent flashbacks, Orange is rehearsing his cover with the handler and preparing for his first meeting with Joe, which involves the commute story. He rehearses the story to make it believable as part of his cover. At a local nightclub, Mr. Orange meets Joe, Eddie, and Mr. White. He tells them a fabricated story about being in the men's room with a large bag full of high-quality glucose. He finds 4 Los Angeles County sheriffs with a German Shepherd, and he explains his coolness under pressure, knowing the dog can smell the shipment. The group is wholly amused and accepts him into their gang. Later, Orange goes on a drive with Eddie, White, and Pink, during which they discuss their favorite movie soundtracks and Pam Grier movies from the 1970s. However, White and Pink's racist remarks about African Americans anger him, as his friend and handler is black. They are silently being tailed by unseen police detectives from Orange's apartment. At the warehouse, Joe meets with all of the members of the gang, where he warns them that their joking camaraderie might get them in trouble if they don't take the heist seriously. He provides them with their aliases for use and discusses the details of the upcoming diamond store robbery. A brief argument ensues when Pink complains about his name. Joe angrily informs everyone that he has previously decided to choose everyone's aliases to avoid arguments. Joe regains his control over the meeting, and they begin plotting the heist. After the meeting, Orange develops a friendship with White as they drive over to the jewelry store to discuss their roles in the upcoming robbery. White tells Orange about a few methods of crowd control he knows are foolproof. In another flashback to the robbery getaway, we see that Brown was shot in the head and dies while driving their escape car with Orange and White in the backseat, which crashes into a parked car just a few distances from the jewelry store. Orange watches helplessly as White exits the car, fires his handguns at an approaching police vehicle, and violently massacres both cops on the spot. With Brown now dead, White and Orange flee the scene and make it to another street. While attempting to steal another getaway car, Orange was shot in the stomach by the female driver, prompting him to reflexively shoot and kill her. Back in the present, Eddie, White, and Pink return to the warehouse to find Blonde dead. Orange claims that Blonde was going to kill Marvin and the rest of the gang so that he could take the diamonds for himself. Boiling over with rage, Eddie briefly reveals Blonde's backstory, that he was a close friend of his and a loyal soldier of his father's. Eddie becomes even angrier as Orange struggles to defend himself, leading him to fatally shoot Nash 3 times. Joe himself arrives, and after informing the group that Mr. Blue was killed by the police, confidently accuses Orange of being an informant. White comes to Orange's defense, alternately appealing and debating Orange's loyalty to the gang. Joe argues that all he needs to spot a traitor is his own instinct and draws his gun on Orange. White draws on Joe and Eddie draws on White. They hold off for a few moments until Eddie yells at White to stop pointing his pistol at Joe. Everyone begins shooting, leaving Joe and Eddie dead, White severely wounded, and Orange mortally wounded. Pink, who hid to avoid the shootout, took the cache of diamonds and fled the warehouse. As police sirens are heard outside, White cradles Orange in his arms, and Orange reveals that he is in fact a detective. Devastated, White begins sobbing in frustration and points his gun at Orange's head as police can be heard outside. At that moment, the police can be heard raiding the warehouse, with the camera in a close-up of White's face, demanding he drop his gun. He refuses and shoots Orange, resulting in the police opening fire on White just before the screen goes black. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this.